Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 28th of November 2024. We're going to start actually not really on geopolitics, but this is such a wonderful observation, wonderful but so frustrating and anger-inducing that I just had to share it. So, after the US approved ATACMS missiles for Ukraine, Kyiv fired 6 at the military site in Russia's Bryansk region, sparking a global panic and claims of escalation. 6 missiles at a military site in Bryansk. Today, Russia launched 91 missiles and up to 100 drones at Ukraine's energy grid with little global outcry. So think about when we seen on Fox News in that interview I showed you last night where they're discussing these long-range ATACMS are not long-range, and then talking about the intermediate range ballistic missile, which is actually longer than the ATACMS range. So that's a intermediate range, but ATACMS are long range. Okay. 6 of those sent at a military target. Everyone goes nuts. 91 missiles sent into the length and breadth of Ukraine with 100 drones. And everyone's like, yeah. The situation is as obscene as it is absurd, says philosopher Slavoj Žižek. 6 Ukrainian ATACMS into Russia caused global panic, while Russia's everyday destruction of Ukraine becomes normal. It is absolutely unacceptable. So I've posted this on my Facebook, as I will try to keep those that I know around me abreast of current information. Try and do this yourself, guys. Make sure that you place these arguments in the public spaces that you have control over. People need to understand the double standards that are being applied to this conflict. Rank double standards. Ones you might not even notice. The fact that this was all over the news, the kind of ATACMS into Russia, you might have just taken for granted. The fact that that was all over the news and yet the strikes today have been normalised is what is wrong. Is an indication of broken thought within the information spaces we inhabit. Now, moving on to geopolitics. We're going to start with Georgia. So the Georgian government has frozen EU accession talks until 2028. So remember, Georgian Dream actually got in originally under previous elections on an agenda to accede to the EU. Then they've gone against that, and then they rigged the elections, and it was all just a load of nonsense. The country has decided to forego any EU budget grants until then. Prime Minister Irakli Kobaychidze has announced this at the office of the Georgian Dream Party. Now, this has caused lots of people to come out onto the streets of Tbilisi. So local media report that people gathered in Tbilisi for a protest near the Parliament building after the Prime Minister's announcement he would not be negotiating to join the EU until 2028. Mass rallies, says Anton Gerashenko, are taking place in Georgia after the authorities rejected European integration. Protesters gathered in front of the Parliament building in Tbilisi. Earlier, the country's Prime Minister, as mentioned, made that declaration. Tim White adds a little tour of Georgia right now after Russia, loving Georgian Dream Party reversed the country's EU integration policy. There have been widespread protests nationwide. First, the capital Tbilisi, where people are in front of the parliament, blocking the road again. There's a lot of people there. Remember, there's a relatively small country population-wise. Then you've got Batumi in Georgia, hatred of the ruling Georgian Dream Party with more protests there. Then in Zugdidi, protests against the Russia-loving party, which is thought to have stolen the election to nationwide. And this is from Kutaisi. There have been scuffles and clashes at the office of the hated Georgian Dream Party. Kutaisi Post reports that police physically attacked civil activist Mishiko Mumiadze. And then Gori and Rustavi have joined in. So despite the rain, all Georgia's 6 biggest cities hold protests tonight. I hope that this is something that remains in place for the Georgians, that they keep up their protests against the Russification of the country. Right, speaking of which, we are going to go to Romania. So last night, the pro-Russian Kalin Georgescu, he was a guy who came from nowhere, registered only on October 1st and won that first round of the presidential elections. He dropped the act, says Derek Tinas, and began issuing threats and ultimatums on primetime TV. Quote, tell the young people now in the city squares to go home to their parents. So these are protesters, I presume. We don't want anything to happen to them. Something really bad to happen to them. Interesting. Right, Pekka Kaliniemi does a Vatnik soup for him, so let's go through that. So in today's Vatnik soup, I'll introduce a Romanian politician and conspiracy theorist, Kalin Georgescu. He's best known for his pro-Kremlin and conspiratorial views, running for president of Romania and doing it by only campaigning on TikTok. Georgescu has a doctorate in pedology, a branch of soil science, and held various positions in Romania's environment ministry during the 90s. Between 1999 and 2012, he was a representative for Romania of the National Committee of the United Nations Environment Programme. He was proposed as Romania's Prime Minister in 2011, 12 and 16 by Romanian far-right parties, but he rose to international infamy in 2024 when he ran for President of Romania independently and obtained the most votes, 22.95%, out of all the candidates in the first round. And I guess if you were just looking at him as a kind of anti-establishment, maybe even a left-winger, thinking, hey, here's someone who's got some environmental credentials, you might be forgiven for, not looking past that and seeing actually he's got an awful lot of other dubious beliefs as well. So this was totally unexpected, as he outperformed most surveys, shocking Romania's political establishment. Romanian political consultant Cristian Andrei stated that Georgescu's popularity appears to be a large protest or revolt against the establishment. Quote, the mainstream political parties have lost a connection with regular Romanians, he said. You don't have strong candidates or strong leaders. That there are weak candidates, weak leaders, and the parties in general are pretty much disconnected. You can see this around the world. If you don't have a strong leader, you see this in the US, right? So for one reason or another, the Democrats are seen as the establishment party now. It's really interesting how that there's been a reversal there. So they are seen as the institutional party, the party of, you could argue the rule of law, the institutions. This is a small c conservative kind of outlook, which is the importance of checks and balances and institutions. You've got an anti-establishment party, the GOP MAGA version of the GOP, the Trumpian version, has taken a wrecking ball to the institutions. You've got Musk coming in and saying, right, I'm going to make $2 trillion worth of cuts and we're going to get rid of people left, right and centre. And this is the kind of anti-establishment vibe that is sweeping across the world at the moment. Well, that is what appears to be taking place in Romania as well. Like in many other Western countries, Romania's large budget deficit, relatively high inflation and economic challenges may have pushed mainstream candidates towards populist rhetoric, offering quick and easy solutions for complex global problems. That sentence is pretty much sums everything up at the moment. That is brilliant. Like many other Western countries, Romania's large budget deficit, so think about all the countries with large budget deficits, US, relatively high inflation, US and every other country, economic challenges may have pushed mainstream candidates towards populist rhetoric, offering quick and easy solutions, tariffs, get rid of all the immigrants for complex global problems. Bosh. Therein lies the synopsis of modern politics, I would say. Georgescu's, and we can connect this, I did this the other day, to kind of psychology and how we don't have the mental capacity to play the long game, that we always want instant solutions. Like, we get so distressed if we don't have the internet for more than a couple of minutes. Well, more than a couple of seconds, actually. That our lives spent on TikTok and social media are flicking through to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And we want that instant gratification. And that, I think, transfers across onto all expectations in life. Like ordering something, I want it here, I want it now. To politics, I want a solution, I want it here and I want it now. That sounds like a really simple, easy solution. It's a really big, bombastic claim. I'm going to go for that. Oh, what do you mean that's going to cause massive inflation for me? Is completely unrealistic. Why didn't you tell me that? Because you didn't want to listen to complex ideas, and all you want to hear is some easy solution to a really bloody difficult problem. Oh, okay. Can I find another really easy solution to the problem I've just caused by choosing an easy solution to a really complex problem? Can I just hop from one easy solution to another easy solution and never really get engaged in complex political thoughts? Yeah, I think I'll do that. Bong, 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 bong. Oh dear, I've just turned into a perpetual populist. Georgescu's policies are typical of for a populist candidate, supporting Romanian farmers, reducing dependency on imports, and ramping up energy and food production. But his massive success, so it's almost like Romania first, right? But his massive success can be accounted to one important factor: his campaign on TikTok. And there's where he stands if you want to read that on the screen. Kalin is extremely popular on TikTok. His first account had accumulated 1.7 million likes before it was deleted, and his current official account has 440,000 followers and 5 million likes. It is also clear that these numbers have been manipulated and are by no means organic. In other words, there's likely sort of troll farm and bot farms being engaged there. After taking a closer look, Georgescu appears to be a regular vatnik, conspiracy theorist. His previous pro-Russian statements were so extreme that some even consider him a representative of the Kremlin's interest in Romania. As is tradition, he's also a harsh critic of the EU and NATO. So here's a newspaper headline: Georgescu, Russophile on the face of Pandeli TV, promoted by Sputnik. Quote, Romania's chance in Russian wisdom. The US military-industrial complex is interested in pushing toward conflict. So he is the antithesis of that, right? Even calling the ballistic missile defense system based in Defeselu, a Romanian NATO base, a, quote, shame of diplomacy. He's also claimed that NATO wouldn't protect its members in case of a Russian invasion. So yeah, it's pretty obvious where he sits politically speaking. He's also praised Vladimir Putin as, quote, a man who loves his country, and stated that Romania should abide by Russian wisdom. He has referred to Ukraine as an invented state. Ugh. Of course, he said he's not pro-Russian, but merely wants to engage in dialogue with them. Yes, okay, of course. There you go. Very, very depressing claims. Right, to continue, he used to be a member of the Nationalist Conservative Alliance for the Union of Romanians, AUR party, but left the group after he was accused of being pro-Kremlin and too critical of NATO. Previously, Georgescu had invited the Russian fascist Alexander Dugin, oh my goodness, to visit Romania. Oh, that's, I mean, you can't get more pro-Russian than this. Recently, Dugin praised Kalin during an interview, claiming that Kalin Georgescu is an outstanding politician. He is useful for us. He cannot be called pro-Russian, but he is similar to Orban. So basically, you would just get another Viktor Orban sitting in Eastern European in an Eastern European seat of power. As was mentioned, Kalin is also a raging conspiracy theorist. He doesn't believe in the moon landing, claims the carbonated drinks contain nanochips, which enter you like into a laptop, and says that climate change is a global scam, interesting for an environmentalist, that has nothing to do with reality. Ugh. Just... And there's more. He claims that the pyramids in Egypt are powerful energy centres that haven't yet been activated. He's also said that while working in the UN, he took part in some very serious discussions on other non-human species. And of course, there's the classics, such as promoting the idea of a new world order planned by the World Economic Forum and its founder, Klaus Schwab. So you can see some of the claims here on the screen as I cycle through them. So Georgescu claims that Schwab and his oligarch allies are trying to turn the UN into the world oligarch system. Personally, I think you got more chance of Elon Musk doing that, but there you go. Incidentally, Georgescu's team kept all this information hidden during the first round of elections, and even his Wikipedia page, both in English and in Romanian, seemed quite presentable until Georgescu fan 1488 came along right before the elections. So he has really sought to hide a lot of his more nefarious beliefs and positioning and posturing. But I wonder whether with this coming to light, whether he will get soundly beaten in the second round. I hope that's the case. Anyway, to continue, Pekka says, Romanian law states that all candidates have to declare the funds they've used for their campaign. Kalin declared absolutely nothing and still clings to that, despite his paid political ads on TikTok amounting to several $million. This headline says the presidential candidates received contributions of 100 million lei for the elections, who spent the most. But it's let's have a look if there's anything. So Hayer's appeal comes only 2 days after Georgescu's shock victory. He had no party backing and polls have failed to pick up on his popularity, though researchers are now zeroing on a major TikTok campaign he led in the days leading up to the election. Quote, we believe that TikTok was misused and was led to be misused by him and an army of fake accounts that were used for this purpose, said Bogdan Manolea, Executive Director of the Romanian Campaign Group Association for Technology and the Internet. Romanian Prime Minister Marcel Ciolocau on Tuesday said funding for Georgescu's campaign on TikTok needed to be reviewed. Quote, it's a system. I don't know how legal it is. I understood how the system was used. The source of financing, in my opinion, is to be followed. Follow the money. Absolutely. Anyway, Pekka continues. Romanian war correspondent and political consultant Radu Hosu, who we're going to join in a second, accounted Georgescu's success to several factors, including the decades-long failure of the state education system, coupled with the moral bankruptcy of the political classes in recent years. And corruption in Romania does need to be sorted out. So according to him, social frustration coupled with the lack of understanding of the national and international context, lack of education, combined with a massively manipulated social media campaign, have led to the creation of this political product. Wow, you don't say, because I think that's a problem everywhere. Until now, Romania has staunchly supported Ukraine, even allowing its neighbour to use the Romanian port of Constanța on the Black Sea to export its grain. Romania is also home to the largest American military base in Europe. The country has also signed, he says, a strategic partnership with Ukraine. But if Georgescu wins, we may see a dramatic change in these policies, and we've already seen similar political successes based on populist rhetoric in Hungary, Austria and Slovakia, which is absolutely worrying. Is this kind of approach that's gathering momentum in Eastern Europe. These elections should be seen as yet another canary in a coal mine, warning of how much of a powerful tool social media can be in politics. We already saw this with Elon buying Twitter and turning it into a personal MAGA megaphone, and now Team Georgescu won the first round basically with TikTok. It is incredibly scary. Georgescu's opponent is a journalist turned mayor, also relatively unknown. She and the party supporting her have little to no political background, and she's been criticised for her lack of experience in foreign policy. She's staunchly pro-NATO and pro-Ukraine, which is, obviously from our point of view, good news. To complicate things even more, the Constitutional Court is now likely demanding a recount of the votes, which would probably eliminate Elena Lasconi, who barely managed to get to the second round by a thin margin from the race. So there you go. But I don't know if that would then help opponents of Georgescu. The second round of the presidential election between Kalin Georgescu and Elena Lasconi, if the recount doesn't change the situation, will be held on the 8th of December 2024. Oh, I see. So Lasconi would go by the wayside, and it could be someone else who's not so pro-NATO and pro-Ukraine. Anyway, there's some context for you. I thought that would be useful. We have a really long thread by Radu Hosu that was referenced in that. I'll probably leave that for tomorrow, otherwise this will be too long, this video. But I think that would be useful to give some further context to what's going on in Romania. Now, going over to the US, President Donald Trump, as I mentioned yesterday, has appointed retired General Keith Kellogg, 80, as the US Special Envoy for Ukraine. Kellogg has presented Trump with a plan to end the war, and it includes freezing the combat along the current front lines, pushing both Ukraine and Russia into new negotiations. So in my video last night, I was pleasantly surprised with Kellogg's views on Ukraine and his views about Russia, knowing that Russia are the bad guys, knowing that you need to be strong against Russia and not to appease Russia, but also advocating what I think is a problematic approach, which is forcing the negotiations. I don't think either side will go to the table, and I don't know what the options are if that happens. But I think that is to the benefit of Russia, that approach. And it does look like that's what's going on. So in my breaking news video last night, I was actually quite positive right throughout the video about Kellogg, for good reason. I think he's an all right person on Ukraine, to be honest. But the weakest part of Kellogg's positioning is the peace plan, and that seems to be the most important component of his position. Now, I don't actually know how much power he will have as well as an envoy. Doesn't seem to be a decision-making position. Mike Waltz, on the other hand, is possibly more central to the decision-making as the national security advisor. So he's been weighing, apparently, several proposals in recent days for ending the war between Russia and Ukraine, according to CNN. Trump officials will likely push for a ceasefire early on to freeze the conflict and push for the EU and NATO allies to take on more of the cost-sharing burden for supporting Ukraine. Interesting that today, great news, Norway has not only agreed to up their contributions to supporting Ukraine, they were thinking of changing it from 1.38, something like that, $1.37 billion of aid last year to 2.75 this year, so doubling it. I believe now they've actually put it through today as something like 3.4 billion or something. It's even more. So Norway, that's awesome. Also, I believe they have agreed to be responsible for the security of the logistics of the delivery of military aid through Poland and Europe to Ukraine. And I wonder whether that's something the Americans would have previously been doing. So this could look like Europe is already putting things in place to say, look, we'll take care of this, we'll do this, to preempt the Americans possibly, or the Trump administration. So, yeah, interesting. Now, here we have the Kiev Independent saying, Ukraine says US landmines are necessary. Trump's ally disagrees. So I said something in an earlier video that we are, interestingly, not hearing much from Trump on Ukraine, which I think is good. So I think he's been told not to say stuff. He's been not particularly pro-Ukraine in his entire life. And everything he said since 2007, pretty much. He's not been on the side of Ukraine and tried to get Zelensky to get in dirt on Biden. And that was why that whole initial impeachment took place. Lots of people, even someone yesterday or today, was it John Oliver saying, not that John Oliver, on my thread saying, well, Trump got the javelins. No, he didn't. Trump tried to stop the javelins. The javelins were put in place by Congress at the time in the Trump administration, but there'd been a long process since 2014 of trying to get more lethal aid. Eventually it got through, but it was Congress that did that, and it was Senator John McCain that was largely responsible for that. Trump came along and said no. So Congress said yes. Trump said no, you ain't getting the javelins until you get me dirt on Biden. That then caused a bit of a kerfuffle, and he eventually allowed the javelins to go through. But to think that Trump was responsible for the javelins getting through is a bastardization of history. And it's what Trump says. Trump says, I'm the one that got javelins through. No, you tried to stop them. You tried to use them as leverage and blackmail, and you were essentially found out, and that's why you got impeached. So you need to be really careful on this idea that Trump was responsible for the javelins, and he should be congratulated for that. You've got Tucker Carlson, and so I was saying that Trump's been quite quiet. Donald Trump Jr., who's massively anti-Ukrainian, has been quiet in the last couple of weeks. And David Sachs, who's one of these tech bros with Elon Musk, haven't said too much on Ukraine, interestingly, where they were quite freely critical of Ukraine. Tucker Carlson, it appears, is still, pretty anti-Ukrainian here, who says there's no justification for using anti-personnel mines in this conflict, which can't hope to be solved. He has said that the change of restrictions by Biden is the most evil thing he's ever seen, or whatever it was he was saying recently. He is still going batshit nuts batshit crazy about Ukraine, unfortunately. Tucker Carlson, he is just completely wrong on Ukraine, and unfortunately he is in a position of influence and power, and that's something that we need to work out how to combat, because all of these positions of power, Twitter and Tucker Carlson and blah blah blah, actually are connected, because Twitter it was Musk's Twitter that resurrected Tucker Carlson after his fired from Fox, and it was, it's Twitter that is the platform for his show. So yeah, anyway, but there's still plenty of problematic voices in the information spaces, Joe Rogan, etc., etc. Okay. CNN have then come out and said, right, okay, as mentioned, the Trump team plans to condition US aid on Ukraine's peace talks with Russia. So this does sound like the Kellogg flights peace plan, which is, if you don't come to the negotiating table, Ukraine, we will stop aid to you. If you don't come to the negotiating table, Russia will give shed loads of aid to Ukraine, even more aid. But of course, okay, what happens if they both refuse? So Trump officials plan to force Ukraine into peace talks by tying US aid to negotiations and delaying NATO membership. I think that's deeply problematic, raising sovereignty concerns. So this is the part that I don't like, which is that forcing them to a peace deal is not good for Ukraine. Now, Europe is in actual war with Russia, according to former UK intelligence chief. Quote, I think we have to face up to the fact that the Russians think they're in a state of war with us, Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, told Sky News on November the 27th. Dearlove's comments came days after Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk warned that Russia's full-scale war in Ukraine risked escalating into a global conflict. According to Dearlove, the conflict has already spiraled beyond Ukraine's borders. Donald Tusk has referred to it as a pre-war situation. I think he's wrong. I think it's an actual war. Dearlove said Russia was waging a hybrid war against Europe across multiple sectors, involving acts of sabotage and some very aggressive moves. Directors of intelligence services in Europe, the US and the UK have characterized Russia as going feral. He said, quote, going feral. Russian special services have been linked to sabotage efforts across Europe, including cyber attacks, espionage, and election interference. Since joining NATO in 2023, Finland has complained of intensifying hybrid attacks from bordering Russia. As Russian aggression mounts, the Western coalition may be facing a split, as US President-elect Donald Trump's upcoming inauguration heralds a shift in Washington support for Europe, NATO, and Ukraine. Western nations are now in a very dangerous situation, Dearlove said. While Dearlove said it would be preferable for the West to engage in talks with Kremlin, he warned that President Putin was not likely to cooperate. I think we're in a very difficult situation, and Russia's probably better to have some sort of dialogue with them than no contact at all, so I don't rule that out. But I do think at the moment, I'm not sure Russia is in a mood or a situation where it's going to be very easy to talk to Putin. Now, this is interesting. I went and gave a talk in Stockbridge in Hampshire, however many months ago now, talking about how we're in World War III. And isn't it funny now? I mean, I don't want to pat myself on the back, because it's a horrible thing to be talking about, but sometimes I wonder, people don't like saying things because it's uncomfortable to say them. And, oh my God, if we have to say we're in World War III, we have to do something about it. But lots of people are like, oh, we're not in World War III. I'd stop your fear-mongering. When I was saying this on Facebook and whatnot, people are like, no, don't be, no. It's like, okay, define war, see how many countries are involved in them, see what all of these countries are doing, providing finances, money, innovation, tech, huge amounts of military aid, everything you can fight with, trainers, economic sanctions, political sanctions. So this is political war, economic war, trade war with Russia, conventional war where we're providing everything apart from boots on the ground, and actually we've got special forces in there, and then we're involved in information war and cyber war. Tell me how we're not at war with Russia. Tell me how, with the amount of effort we're putting into supporting Ukraine, that we're not at war. Okay, our people aren't dying on the front, but everything else we are doing. And not just us, there's 50 nations to differing degrees supporting Ukraine. And on the other side, you've got China, Iran, North Korea helping Russia. And then you've got BRICS kind of sitting off to the side, and you've got other people who are helping, in the getting around those economic sanctions through loopholes, etc., etc. We're all involved in this. This is a global conflict. Whether you want to call it World War III or not, I couldn't give a monkey's. It's functionally World War III. Anyway, The Economist has come out with an article, How Will Donald Trump Handle the War in Ukraine? In other words, what are his peace plan options? We're going to go through this. I think it's important. If Mr. Trump's priority is to strike a deal, any deal, then he could simply cut aid to Ukraine and insist that it accept Russia's demands. Some in his circle, such as his son Donald Trump Jr., delight in the idea that Mr. Trump will cut off Ukraine's allowance, i.e. the billions America is giving it in military and economic support to fend off Russia's full-scale invasion. Quote, I don't really care what happens to Ukraine one way or another, declared J.D. Vance, the vice president-elect in 2022. I remain opposed to virtually any proposal for the United States to continue funding this war, he added in April this year. Hear that again. I remain opposed to virtually any proposal for the United States to continue funding this war. Wow. If America cut Ukraine adrift, Putin could more or less dictate terms. In June, he set out his stall. Ukraine should withdraw its forces from the 4 provinces annexed by Russia. Roughly a quarter of their even though roughly a quarter of their territory remains in Ukrainian hands, Russia would also keep Crimea, which it occupied in 2014. Ukraine would have to drop plans to join NATO too. This is doubtless posturing. In November, Russian officials told Reuters, a news agency, that they would consider merely freezing the current lines with room for negotiation over the precise carve-up of territory. But the Ukrainian forces retreating, the Russian defense industry humming, and North Korean troops joining the fray on Russia's side, Mr. Putin believes he has the upper hand. Although economic and social pressures are rising at home, he is in no rush to end the war. He could even dust off some of the humiliating demands Russian negotiators made in peace talks in 2022, including strict limits on Ukraine's armed forces, no more than 85,000 personnel, tanks 342 at most, and missiles a maximum range of 40 kilometers, because he knows the Ukrainians would not accept this, even under pressure. Some observers believe, however, that Mr. Trump would consider a Ukrainian defeat bad both for America and his own image. Actually, going back to that point, so if the idea is get them both to the negotiating table, if Russia come into the negotiations with a completely unrealistic set of expectations that Ukraine obviously go, well, we're clearly not going to do that, then what does America do then? Like, if Russia say, well, look, we came to the negotiating table, they just didn't agree. Yeah, but you said something insane. Like, what does the US do then? I mean, you've got them to negotiating tables. They couldn't negotiate. How do you continue to support Ukraine or not? Interesting. Some observers believe, however, that Mr. Trump would consider a Ukrainian defeat bad both for America and his own image. Quote, Trump won't be played for a sucker, argues Matthew Kroenig of the Atlantic Council, whom Trump has chosen as his national security advisor. He recently co-authored an article with Mike Walls, the national security advisor. Quote, he will walk away from a bad deal, Mr. Trump insiders say, fears a failure in Ukraine would dent his popularity, just as the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 hurt Joe Biden. So you don't want to replicate Afghanistan and kind of pull out of Ukraine and cause an absolute collapse, because it would look really bad on you, and that's important for Trump, as it is for many people. Mr. Waltz has acknowledged that America may need leverage to extract better terms from Mr. Putin. He has suggested that America expand gas exports, crack down on Russian oil sales, provide more weapons to Ukraine, and ease restrictions on their use if Mr. Putin does not come to the table. Kurt Volker, who served as a special envoy to Ukraine during Mr. Trump's first term, suggests Mr. Trump's approach might initially be simple, to a demand to stop the war without conditions. Others in Magaland are also thinking about how a deal might be enforced. Keith Kellogg, a retired general, whom Mr. Trump this week picked as special envoy to Russia and Ukraine, and Fred Fleiss, a CIA veteran at a pro-Trump think tank, have proposed that America, quote, continue to arm Ukraine to ensure Russia will make no further advances and will not attack again after a ceasefire. Ukraine would not be asked to cede territory, and America and its allies would only lift sanctions and normalize ties if Russia were to sign a settlement acceptable to Ukraine. And so that's the important part. If Mr. Trump were to embrace these proposals, Ukrainians would be delighted. Another further question is what role Europe will play. Advisors to Macron worry that diplomacy will become an American-Russian affair with both Ukraine and Europe left out. Quote, I don't think we should fight Trump on the point that we want peace in Ukraine, says a diplomat from Eastern Europe. It need not be only apologists for Russia who call for the war to end, he argues, but the goal, he adds, should be a lasting peace, not a half-baked one. Mr. Trump is still playing with ideas, says the diplomat, and he's looking for input from Europeans. input, yes, but perhaps also a pound of flesh. Mr. Trump believes that when it comes to helping Ukraine, as with European defence in general, Europeans should be bearing most of the costs. European countries allocated around $124 billion in aid to Ukraine from January 2022 to August 2024, compared to America's $85 billion. But if Mr. Trump were to demand an 80-20 split instead, so be it, suggests the European diplomat who thinks that a modest price to pay for America's continued involvement. Europe's war fatigue is overstated. In Germany, for instance, according to recent Barometer poll, 43% of respondents would like aid to Ukraine to increase, whereas only 24% want it reduced. The problem is that if a deal is done, political support for maintaining aid might dissipate quickly. Russia is spending more than 8% of GDP on defence, and so could continue to rearm. Ukraine, meanwhile, would be forced to demobilise to revive its economy. That might tempt Putin to try again in a year or two. Ukraine naturally would like firm security guarantees that would ideally come in the form of NATO membership. Mr. Trump has often disparaged the alliance. Quote, NATO is a relic that should be scrapped, wrote Pete Hegseth, the pick for Defence Secretary. And there you go. I don't know how to stop my new phone. No, there you go. So 4 years ago, and even if Mr. Trump were to come around, it is possible that other members of NATO, such as Hungary, would veto Ukraine's accession. We are kind of back to where we started, which is, well, we kind of get an idea of the Trump administration is going to try and force them to the table. But if you're going to take NATO off the table, then Ukraine aren't going to agree to that. They, for good reason, they desperately need NATO so that they are guaranteed that Russia won't take a second bite at the apple. Instead of NATO then, Mr. Trump's entourage have suggested, the article continues, that Europe instead form a coalition of the willing to deploy troops inside Ukraine. Any deployment would severely tax Europe's armed forces. Eastern European countries, several of which host multinational NATO battle groups, would not want to give them up, nor would NATO's High Command want to hand over the alliance's reserve forces. Money is another concern. Germany's planned deployment of a brigade to Lithuania, for example, cost as much as €6 billion to set up and €800 million a year to run. Bases in Ukraine would involve more complex logistics and require more sophisticated defences. Locating 5 brigades, they say, could easily exceed $43.5 billion spent to date by EU countries on military aid to Ukraine. Above all, it is unlikely that Europeans would want to send any troops without at least some American involvement, although air cover and indirect support might suffice. So there's lots of details that you would need to sort through. Trying to work out exactly how a peace will be brought about by Trump is... There's going to be obviously a lot of speculation. There are a lot of unknowns, but I just hope that they don't really overdo it in forcing Ukraine to an early peace that will just benefit Russia. But anyway, there's more to the article. You can go and read the rest of that at The Economist. Interesting stuff. Now, Shashank Joshi here, referring to The Guardian. This kind of goes back to we are in World War III, but also the idea of when does, and I've talked about this many times before, when does an event get deemed significant enough to trigger Article 5 that isn't an act of conventional warfare? So, quote, Russia's acts of sabotage against Western targets may eventually prompt NATO to consider invoking the alliance's Article 5 mutual defence clause. The head of Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service has warned. So the Germans being quite forthright here, pretty troubling BND assessment, quote, according to the assessment of his experts, high-ranking officials in the Russian Defence Ministry doubt whether NATO's Article 5, including US protective measures for Europe, would actually be invoked in case of an emergency, the intel chief said. I think it is a difficult one. This is, when does a cyber attack be seen as one? When is it seen as big enough to invoke Article 5? What is the trigger point on that spectrum? And I could bore you with the philosophy of the Socrates paradox, and there's no defined point. It's kind of fuzzy. But at some point, you go from not having a sand dune to piling on grains of sand and then getting a sand dune. At some point, it becomes a sand dune. So at some point, there has to be a kind of sense that this is, although it's not clearly definable, we can't just keep going forever until we have a sand dune, but it's not sand dune because you're just adding one sand granule at a time. Or the Socrates paradox works in reverse. So what happens? Okay, let's get into this. You have a sand dune, you take off a grain of sand, you say, is it not a sand dune? You go, well, no, it's still a sand dune. And you keep doing that, and there's no one single point where you go, it's no longer a sand dune. But the paradox is you get down to 0 grains of sand, and it's still a sand dune, because you've not found that one point where you go, it's not a sand dune. And then you've got to 0 grains of sand. So to apply this to the problem here is like, oh, there's a cyber event, or it's not that serious. Okay, it's not going to trigger Article 5. And then you keep going. There's no one definable point. And then you end up having your entire country being completely destroyed by cyber warfare. And you're going, oh, we haven't reached, I don't know what, there isn't that one single point. No, that's not enough. At some point, we've got to just go, that's enough, right? And draw that line in the sand, so to speak, pun intended. So that's your one problem, the kind of level of severity of cyber warfare, or event. But then there's also the level of certitude over culpability. So who did that? The plausible deniability is the kind of mantra attached to cyber warfare. You do things that you can't 100%. If I drive a Russian tank with a Russian crew into another country, and actually they tried this in 2014 by Little Green Men, and they got away with it, the Russians. But generally speaking, if you're going to drive a bunch of tanks into another country, you're going to say, okay, well, that's Russia, and they've attacked us, right? But with the cyber warfare, it's not so obvious. And that means that triggering Article 5 becomes even more problematic. Just an opinion here but it's really good that people are talking about that. Andrew Perpetua's got an opinion here. Take it for what it is, but I think it's interesting. I believe that the permission to shoot ATACMS into Russia and the $24 billion aid package for the next year, so that's $24 billion that Biden wants to replenish US stocks, both either came from Trump as his idea or were Biden's idea with Trump's blessing. I also think there is a rumor that actually Biden did pass it by Trump, the lifting of restrictions. I also think the escalation that Putin has been attempting to achieve over the past 2 weeks is coming as a result of some back-channel negotiation that went sour between himself and Trump. In short, I think Putin overplayed his hand and effed himself. I think Putin thought that capturing land in Ukraine gave him leverage over the rest of the world, when in reality the rest of the world cares more about the Russian economy than whatever land is captured in Ukraine. Russia is weak as hell, probably the weakest it's ever been. People view Russia as something they can take advantage of. Even if you don't care about Ukraine, you can use the war to reduce oil and gas prices and lower prices for all sorts of other commodities as well. All of the precious metals and crap they are mining. People are like, yeah, that's great. You captured some town here that I can't pronounce. Give me some nickel for 50% off, please. That is, I think, is a really interesting point here. And people recognise that Trump is going to be much more attracted to the sense that there will be economic gain for the US helping Ukraine because of the natural resources involved. But likewise, screwing over Russia means that you will get some economic benefit from this kind of the king of natural resources and the grain basket of the world and the oil producer and the hydrocarbon gas and rare metals and everything. If they're on their knees, you can take advantage of them, prices go down, and etc., etc. That is something that's potentially rather attractive to the US. And so they care less about how much land is taken in Ukraine and more about economic matters. Russia has threatened Japan with nukes in response to increased military cooperation with the United States. The US is drawing a joint military plan with Japan to deploy HIMARS and other weapons to Japan's Nansei Islands, according to a report by Kyodo News. The plan is expected to be completed by December. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said that Moscow's reaction to the possible deployment of US medium-range missiles in Japan is reflected in the updated doctrine on nuclear deterrence. So on and so forth. Lots more to be said there, but there is some more saber rattling from Russia, this time shaking the saber at Japan, going towards the east. Now, something I haven't really mentioned, but Syrian rebels have captured the villages outside of Aleppo from the Assad regime. Now, this is the Russian-supported Assad regime. Things are not going well in Syria for Assad, which is good for Russia. And I wonder if it's because Russia has been distracted, hasn't been able to help Assad so much. They've got their own issues in Ukraine. This could cause even further problems for Russia. If they lose Assad, if they lose Syria, then they lose a port on the Mediterranean, which is incredibly important for them. This is significant. Keep an eye on this, guys. There are more indications of Russia being in economic problems. I won't go through it because I've been speaking for way too long. But there is a debt crisis. You can go and follow this guy to Ceratops on Blue Sky. Really interesting stuff here about debts and yields and foreign currencies. So we'll just go to the end. They can sell gold and Chinese yuan easily. Make up. No. Let's go further on. All this in the backdrop of a stagnant GDP, sky high inflation, as I show, probably deeply in double digits this year, not the 9.1 nonsense the government claims. I don't know what I wanted to show you. I just went through what felt important rumbled probably too much. But what else should be mentioned is that when the stocks are falling, the real estate is or will be falling and bonds are falling. There is no collateral. That would be good. And when banks and institutions borrow against collateral that falls in price, they default on the debt. And this is what will be happening. Check out a lot of defaulting. And I'm pretty sure Russian government will default as well. There will be no money left in the fund in a year and nobody will lend them. They can print money and fund the deficit directly, but that is just so inflationary that the Weimar inflationary dog has entered the thread. In other words, they're getting dangerously close to hyperinflation in the 1930s. And look what happened there. Okay. Putin visited Astana, and this was in Kazakhstan for the CSTO, and someone hacked into one of these big electronic billboards and put the Ukrainian flag up there. Gotta love that. Billboard company blamed it on a cable short circuit. Yeah, of course. And Andriy Yermak from the presidential office for Ukraine said the plan has already been worked out with partners. Ukraine is ready to hold a second peace summit in the near future. So they've had a previous peace summit. That was in Switzerland, wasn't it? They plan on holding another one. They did want Russia to be involved in that. Right, I just want to give you an extra sidebar on, I love talking about Elon Musk. Well, Alexander Vindman, who is a former military person involved in impeachment trials of Trump and whatnot. He's of Ukrainian descent, a former military man in the US, said this.
Clearly, Putin has a type. He likes narcissists and egomaniacs that he knows as a case officer he could easily pander to and manipulate to do his dirty work. We are under attack. Russia has been using different levers, whether that's corruption networks. In this case, it's influencers like Donald Trump, like Elon Musk, to really kind of sow discord. And it's particularly troubling with Elon Musk in this case because Elon Musk has access to state secrets. He has top secret security clearance. It's possible that some of that is seeping through. Putin has been very effective in playing both Trump and Elon, and he's been using the richest man in the world to do his bidding. In some cases, that's encouraging him probably to support Donald Trump. That's not speculation. We see how far in Elon has gone. And then using Twitter as a disinformation platform. So this is not some sort of far off, distant threat. This is going to impact our elections. It's a national security threat.
Okay, I 100% agree, right? But this has really sent Elon off the deep end. So Elon Musk then said Vindman is on the payroll of the Ukrainian oligarchs and has committed treason against the United States, for which he will pay the appropriate penalty, which, as far as I understand it, would be capital punishment, right? So this is Elon Musk, who's at the centre of the government as an unelected bureaucrat, saying X, Y, and Z. And then he's got people absolutely chiming in, your Ian Miles Chong and all sorts of people coming in to support him, Sidney Powell, not to mention likely Farah violations and others, etc., saying that he should, he should be a treasonous traitor. He should be sentenced to death, capital punishment, or imprisonment. Blah blah blah. Other people come to the support of Vindman here. It's now being reported in mainstream media. So here's The Hill. Musk accuses Trump whistleblower Vindman of treason, says he will pay. And Musk added that Vindman, who played a central role in the first impeachment of President Trump, will pay an appropriate penalty. In a response on X, Vindman said Musk's comment were false and completely unfounded accusations. He maintained he was never taking money from Ukrainian oligarchs, while pointing out he runs a non-profit to aid in Ukraine's defense against Russia. I served in the military for nearly 22 years, and my loyalty is supporting the US Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's why I reported presidential corruption when I witnessed an effort to steal an election, he wrote. You, Elon, appear to believe that you can act with impunity and are attempting to silence your critics. I'm not intimidated, he added. Musk's remarks vowing a penalty come as Trump has drawn scrutiny over his repeated pledges to take revenge on his perceived enemies once back in the White House. The former president's fixation on retribution has sparked concern among critics, some of whom worry a second Trump term will lack some of the guardrails that existed in the first 4 years in the Oval Office. Tech billionaire went after Vindman, who worked as a Ukraine expert on the National Security Council and later testified in Trump's 2019 impeachment hearings, after Vindman pointedly criticized Musk in an NBC interview circulated online. As we heard. So the Wall Street Journal reported last month that Musk has been in regular contact with Putin since 2022. Putin and Musk reportedly had various conversations on personal matters, business and geopolitical tensions, while sometimes involving other high-ranking Russian officials, including Putin's first deputy chief of staff, Sergei Kiriyenko. Vindman said Musk's interactions with Putin are particularly troubling since the tech entrepreneur has access to state secrets and top-secret security clearance. So on and so forth that we heard from his statement. The tech entrepreneur has reportedly claimed he holds a US security clearance as part of his federal agreements. In his aerospace company, SpaceX holds contracts with the Department of Defense and Intelligence community worth billions of dollars, while the electric vehicle company Tesla receives federal subsidies. This is not the first time Musk and Vindman have clashed on social media. They've done that before. Vindman called Musk a purveyor of hate and division. In response, the Twitter platform owner labelled Vindman both a puppet and puppeteer. It's worth noting that Vindman's twin brother, Eugene Vindman, a retired army officer as well, has been elected to the US House earlier this month to fill the seat being vacated by Abigail Spanberger from, that looks like Virginia, Democrat. So Ann Apple, but lots of people get involved in this. The reason I'm reporting this is this is becoming fairly big news. Ann Applebaum, read this thread from a heroic American under attack from an unhinged billionaire. Shashank Joshi even. So from The Economist, Musk is playing with fire here, flirting with fascist language and likely encouraging threats of life against former government officials. Deeply dangerous man at heart of the US government. Has no official power, but he could well end up getting people hurt. And it's pretty incredible. I mean, this is all over the internet at the moment. The emperor issues an edict, so people are just seeing Elon Musk as the emperor. Elon is lying. Just ask Grok. You can ask Elon's own, interestingly, his own artificial intelligence through Twitter. So you've got Grok here. You can ask it stuff. Many of Elon's posts on X are not true. Is that correct? Grok answers, Elon Musk's posts on X often contain misinformation or misleading claims, particularly on topics like elections, immigration, and other political issues. This has been noted by various analyses and reports, etc., etc., so on and so forth. So lots of people talking about this. It's worth noting that Elon Musk has just... so if we look at Pekka Kalyan, I just want you to see this because... this is absolutely remarkable, in my opinion, in terms of absolute hypocrisy. Here it is. So Elon Musk retweeted someone who's gone into the European sort of government, the council, looked at commissioners and said, these people aren't elected. This is undemocratic. The EU Parliament. So Elon Musk then said, this is undemocratic. The EU Parliament should vote directly on matters, not give up authority to the EU Commission. Undemocratic. Pekka Kalaniemi says Elon, who will soon be working as an unelected bureaucrat, criticises unelected EU bureaucrats. This is twice now he's not been able to have the self-awareness to realise he's criticising unelected people having power when he himself is the most an incredible example of that. Now, why I keep mentioning Elon Musk and these people like Tucker Carlson is that they have incredible positions of power with regard to information, and they disinform their audience. US Republicans now show the lowest concern about the Russia-Ukraine war threat. A Pew poll shows a sharp decline in Russian concern over Russia's ongoing invasion. Only 19%, less than 1 in 5 Republicans see it as a threat to US security. So it's just, these things have an effect, and that's why people like Musk need to be called out. Anyway, that's enough for me. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.